So today is the long-awaited review on my Centramatic wheel balancers. I think this video has probably been the most requested follow-up over the last few months, and so I just want to say thank you for being patient with me. If you didn't catch the original install video that I did last December 22, I'll put a card up for that and a link in the description below. But you know what took me longer to record this video was partly for a couple reasons. One was that I wanted to make sure that I'm putting out accurate, helpful content. I never want to just throw up content to influence the YouTube algorithm and such. And really what took so long is I was sorting out some relatively minor balance issues related to the fact that when I installed the Centramatics, I removed all the visible wheel weights on the outside of the wheels that were exposed. And I'll talk about that more in just a minute, but that's mainly what took so long for me to come to a point where I could give you an honest review. I also wanted to put several thousand miles on the Centramatics, towing at interstate speeds, and that way I can really give you my own unbiased opinion in the end. And this video is not sponsored by the manufacturer. I spent my own hard-earned money on it. And at the end of the day, I realized that when I'm describing what the balance feels like on my truck, there's a good bit of subjectivity, right? And so I also wanted to make sure that I'm being consistent with what I'm observing so that I can give you the best possible review in the end. And as a bonus in today's video, I'm also going to do kind of an informal MPG loop while I'm recording this. And so I'm going to go ahead and reset the fuel economy here, also do my trip meter here, and I'm just going to be relying on the truck's computer here, so it'll be pretty informal. Of course, I am unladen, I've got no load, and I'll be mostly cruise control in the 50 to 70 mile per hour range. So I'll report back at the end of the video and let you know where we stand. All right, so with that being said, let's go ahead and jump right in. And the first thing I want to cover is whether you should or should not remove the existing wheel weights when you're doing the Centramatics. And in my install video, that was one thing that I kind of went back and forth on. The manufacturer, of course, says that pre-balancing is not required, but at the same time, they say if you have wheel weights on your wheels and tires already and it's balanced properly, then you can leave them on in most cases. And so if you caught my install video, you know that I took all the weights off my wheels except for the inner rear tires on the dually. And I gotta say, I have been truly amazed at how well the Centramatics have balanced my tires. I mean, I've driven about 3,000 miles or so before rebalancing my tires. If you caught my video last week on the Hunter Road Force Elite balancing, that's what I ended up doing. But I drove almost 3,000 miles before that without any balancing. Really, the only weights were the inner ones on the dualies, and there's really only a few situations, a few circumstances where I detected a slight imbalance. The first scenario where I noticed a slight imbalance was on a right-hand turn, one in particular that I take quite frequently. And basically, I start up on a hill and I'm driving down and turning right into traffic. And you kind of have to accelerate quickly. So as I'm coming down that hill and then turning a sharp right, you're accelerating quickly into traffic. And I could almost feel the left rear, the driver's side rear tires, almost like they were skipping just a little bit as I was getting up to speed, in that 30 to 45 mile per hour range. It just felt like it was just hopping just a little bit until I got up to speed. And I think what's going on there is the beads, the shot that's inside the Centramatics, they're being subjected to not only the centrifugal force as the tires are spinning, but also the energy of the truck accelerating, right? I guess the kinetic energy, so to speak. And so that seemed to upset the beads just momentarily for a little bit, and perhaps that's why I felt like it was skipping just a little bit. It was very minor though. The second scenario that I noticed a slight imbalance was any time that I did a hard acceleration, almost, if you can imagine doing a 0 to 60 run, even a straight line, which is pretty rare for me to do while driving the truck. But I did catch myself doing it a few times, maybe on an on-ramp for the interstate. And I did notice, again, it was very slight, very minor, but just a momentary imbalance you know, the wheels almost wanting to hop or skip, mostly in the rear. And again, it settled down within a few seconds, very minor. The last scenario I noticed would be most of the time when I would go over 70 miles per hour. And I don't think I ever got over 80 or 85 at the highest. But basically at the higher speeds, let's say over 70 miles per hour, you know, combined with being on an extremely smooth surface, I could just barely pick up a slight imbalance. And again, I believe coming mostly from the rear. And I'll just mention that in order to really detect, you know, an imbalance and feel it, for me personally, I found that I needed to be driving on an incredibly, you know, smoothly paved road. It's very difficult for me to pick up even on a minor imbalance and then isolate it, you know, compared to the imperfections in the road, the suspension, right? You know, and so really my experiences that I'm sharing with you today are based on being on a very, very smoothly paved surface, you know, about as perfect as you can get. And really only then is when I've been able to pick up some slight imbalances. So again, really impressed with what the Centramatics can do all on their own without, you know, any pre-balancing whatsoever. So if that's your goal in the end, I think you should be able to accomplish it. I mean, every tire and wheel combination is different, unique. So just because it worked for me doesn't mean that it's going to necessarily work for you. But if your wheels and tires are similar to mine, then there's a good chance I think you'll have similar results. Which, by the way, begs a question for me at least, and that is, how is it possible that in the end the Centramatics alone can do such a great job balancing your tires, you know, if you've removed all your wheel weights, right? And if we, you know, dig into the details a little bit, the Centramatics have, and don't quote me on this, I think it's 3 to 4 ounces of shot or weight in the front ones, and then I think it's 6 to 8 on the rear. And again, don't quote me, but I believe it's somewhere in that range. And so if you're like me and you had weights on your wheels already, you can compare the total weights that were on your wheels and see. And in my case, I think I had about, you know, 1.5 to 2.5 ounces of weights on each of my tires before I removed them. And, you know, that's under the amount of shot or weight that's in the Centramatics. And so for me, it makes sense as to why the Centramatics can then compensate on their own like that. I mean, certainly the forces at stake are different in the way that the Centramatics are located in one area of the wheel assembly compared to the inner and outer, you know, wheel rim. But still, purely just from a total weight standpoint, the capability is definitely there. And all that to say, my personal recommendation in the end concerning whether you should remove the wheel weights on your tires, the existing weights, or leave them on, my personal recommendation after driving 3,000 miles without them is that I think you're going to get the absolute best possible ride if you have your wheels and tires balanced properly before putting the Centramatics on. And properly is the key word there. You know, if you didn't catch my last video on balancing, definitely watch that first. But for me personally, I have a lot of confidence in the Hunter Road Force Elite Balancer. And so my recommendation is to find a shop that has that equipment, you know, spend the $100 or so doing that balancing first to make sure they're properly balanced, and then do the Centramatics following if desired. All right, well, let's talk about who will benefit most from the Centramatics. And basically, after driving on them for almost 3,000 miles, I can think of 3 main groups of people. And the first is, if you're someone who doesn't have confidence in your local tire shops or balancers for that matter, you know, maybe you've been down that path before, maybe you've gone back to the same shop 3 or 4 times to try to fix a balance issue, and you're, you know, just fed up basically, you're not seeing the results that you're looking for, then I think in that situation you could probably benefit from Centramatics. You can of course, you know, install them yourself. It's super easy. And I think there's a good chance that it's going to solve your balance issues. The second group that I think would benefit from the Centramatics would be maybe if you're a big DIY person. I mean, maybe you mount your own tires on your own wheels, but you don't have access to a good balancer, or I don't know, maybe you live in a remote area and you just don't want to drive into town to get your wheels balanced. And I think then you could potentially benefit from Centramatic, since you can do it all yourself. You know, you don't have to run any wheel weights. And I think the majority of the time you'll be just fine running the Centramatic solo. But the third group of people, and this is really where I fall, and that is if you've got a heavier or, you know, more aggressive tread pattern on your tire, and you're looking for the best possible ride quality, then I think the Centramatics are a great fit. And speaking of aggressive tread patterns, it's very rare that I don't find, you know, rocks or pebbles in the tread on my Falcon Wild Peaks, and, you know, eventually they fall out most of the time. But the beauty of the Centramatics is that they're going to counteract those types of forces and imbalances, so that regardless of whether I've got rocks stuck in my tread or maybe the tread is wearing abnormally, the Centramatics, they're going to compensate for all that between the science and the physics. And so it just gives me a lot of confidence that I'm always going to be, you know, completely balanced. The whole, you know, the full wheel assembly, everything combined. So those are really the three groups of people that I think would benefit most. And on the flip side, if I were to suggest a group of people that I don't think would benefit as much with the Centramatics, I'd speculate that if you're running highway tires and you've already got perfectly balanced wheels, you know, you've already done the Hunter Road Force Elite balancing that I talked about in my last video, and you're happy with the ride quality, you know, even at speeds in excess of 70 miles per hour, then I don't know that adding the Centramatics is really going to deliver a huge night and day difference, or at least to the point where you're going to be able to discern it, you know, for yourself. And I could be wrong there, but for me personally, I'd be more reluctant to spend that extra money if that was my exact situation. All right, so that leads us to the last question: is it worth the price? It's just north of about $400 for a full set on your truck, which, you know, compared to proper balancing with wheel weights, you know, it's about $100 or so. So it's about 4 times the cost. So is it worth it in the end, right? And I think if you're after the absolute best ride quality possible, you know, you've already done the Hunter Road Force Elite balancing, then I do believe that the Centramatics will take it up to the next level. And for me personally, I realize this is incredibly subjective, by the way, but if I had to rate the ride quality of just having my tires balanced the right way, properly, you know, with the Hunter Road Force Elite balancing alone, I'd probably put that right around an 8 or 9 out of 10, with 1 being the worst and 10 being the best. And then if I were to consider my experience adding the Centramatics on, you know, I kind of did it backwards, but when I think about adding the Centramatics back onto that, then I would rate it at a 10. So hopefully that gives you an idea. I mean, it's really an incremental improvement in the end when you've already got your tires properly balanced to begin with. I'll also mention that the manufacturer has a reputation of standing behind their product, and so that's certainly another reason I think to buy the Centramatics, especially when I think about other miscellaneous vendors and brands that I've had to deal with. You know, sometimes they get defensive about their products, or they don't really stand behind them in the end. And when it comes to Centramatics, I've heard pretty much nothing but good feedback from folks that have had to deal with you know, getting replacements under warranty. So I guess what I'd say in conclusion is that the Centramatic wheel balancers, they are absolutely not a gimmick. I mean, they truly work as they're advertised, and like I said before, I have a lot of confidence in the physics, you know, with the centripetal forces and such, you know. And so unlike some products in the market that kind of leave you wondering if they're actually working in the end, if they're actually doing anything, you know, I mean, I can absolutely say that the Centramatics do exactly what they're advertised to do. But with that being said, like I mentioned in my last video where I shared on what I've learned about balancing in general, I would personally recommend making sure your tires are properly balanced first. In other words, that you have confidence that they are truly balanced properly. And for me, that only came after I had mine done on the Hunter Road Force Elite balancing machine. And so I like to look at properly balanced tires and wheels as kind of a first primary line of defense. And then the Centramatics is more of a secondary line of defense that'll end up kind of polishing and refining any remaining imbalances in a more dynamic fashion. All right, well, I hope that makes sense. Now, I promised I'd check back on the informal MPG loop that I've been running at the same time while recording this video. And right now the trip meter is showing almost 45 miles, and then it's showing 17.5 miles per gallon. So not too bad, just an informal test as a bonus. But I hope you found this video helpful, especially if you've been eyeing Centramatics. Definitely drop me a comment below if you have any questions or feedback. And as always, thanks for watching.